The Philosophy of Elbert Hubbard, page 79. The Taxation of Church Property. I am in receipt of a very interesting letter from the Reverend A.B. Taylor, Lakeside, New York, in which he says that he reads the Fra with much pleasure and profit, and often receives valuable help therefrom in compiling his sermons. Dr. Taylor is an Orthodox Methodist, and the fact that I am able to express for him in degree many of the things he holds as truth is one of the encouraging signs of the times. It is frank, friendly, and beautiful in Dr. Taylor to write me his acknowledgments. But after writing the letter, he adds a postscript. I might say that I have a suspicion he wrote the beautiful letter in order to add the postscript, but I will not. Here is the P.S. One thing I do not like and cannot comprehend is why you so wrongfully advocate the taxing of church property. Then he encloses a column clipping from the Christian Work and Evangelists, wherein the reasons for exemption of church property from taxation are fully set forth. Very seldom does one get the entire argument at first hand, but here it is skillfully presented. I give it in its entirety. The worst enemy New York has, or any city has, is the perennial critic who would tax the churches. Some interesting correspondence has recently been going on in one of the New York newspapers over this matter. Someone by the name of Hubbard discovered that there were several $1 million worth of property in churches which was untaxed. The critic supported his arguments by statements that the churches are not direct public servants, as are schools and hospitals, that they exist to teach certain doctrines of their own, differing among themselves, and which have no direct relation to the public good, some of the doctrines indeed being pernicious according to this critic. The short-sightedness of all this is apparent to the most superficial mind. The policy of taxing the churches would be almost suicidal to any town or city. The churches save New York 50 times that the city loses in taxes from them. Here are a few facts which, when perceived, stop all such talk at once. The church is the greatest police force in the community. The Roman Catholic Church alone, we mention that church because it practices the negative doctrine of restraint more than do the Protestant churches, restrains hundreds of thousands of men and women from petty crimes that would cost New York more than all her courts and police and jails and prisons have cost her for years. Take the churches out of New York for 10 years and it would be an unsafe city to live in, and the expense of administering its criminal courts and prisons would bankrupt it. As a matter of fact, the teaching of any particular theological doctrine is the smallest part of any work the churches do. Go into any church in New York and you will find that fully 3/4 of all the efforts are being directly expended in making good citizens. In Sunday school, the children are being taught honesty, purity, brotherhood, ambition, and the unselfish life. Fully 2/3 of the sermons of the average preacher are direct inspirations to the moral life or instructions in ethics. We venture to say that had our friend collected 50 of the sermons preached in New York last Sunday, he would have found 49 which dealt with practical religious life to one on the doctrine, say, of the future life. Of course, there are millions of people who have found in their experience that the particular doctrines, as our friend called them, produce the highest type of citizenship. As a matter of fact, the main efforts of the churches of New York are put on producing honest and altruistic men. Heaven only knows what would become of the city if its 1,400 churches were crippled by taxes. It is bad enough now. The police service the churches render New York saves the city millions every year. The service of furnishing her with honest and unselfish men cannot be put in numbers. There are none large enough. It will please be noticed that the editor of The Christian Work and Evangelist starts his article by informing us who the worst enemy of New York or any city actually is. This worst enemy, according to my Christian colleague, is the critic who would tax the churches. Thus, before he attempts to reply to the critic, he denounces the critic as not only an enemy of the state, but its worst enemy. Grafters, thieves, dealers in dope, procurers, sweatshop fiends, murderers all take second place. The worst enemy of a city, any city, is the man who advocates the taxation of church property. The editor himself is a Christian, a church member, and a clergyman. Does he stand as a sample of the head, hand, and heart of the modern church member? I think so. He is a man of education, of position, honored and respected in his denomination. And he tells us that people who disagree with him in a matter of finance are not only the enemies of the state, but its worst enemies. A traitor to God is a traitor to his country. Thus did religious fanaticism once link the heretic and the traitor as one. To disagree with the prevailing religion was to be regarded as the foe of society. How hard the tyrants die. Yet many clergymen believe that it would be better to put church property on an absolute parity with all other property. In fact, many churches now voluntarily pay taxes. The great and influential congregation presided over by Rabbi Leonard Levi of Pittsburgh requested the assessors to tax their synagogue at its cost valuation of $300,000. In Toronto is a Baptist church, the Jarvis Street Baptist Church, I believe, that has paid taxes on its property for more than 20 years. Because the congregation, voting on the question, decided that an evasion of taxes on the part of a church because it did good was really no better than the exemption of an individual for the same reason. The enemy of the state, forsooth, is the man who asks someone to pay a few paltry dollars for police and fire protection. Naturally, one might say the enemy of the state is the man who refuses to pay his quota of expense for the maintenance of the government machinery. The editor of The Christian Work and Evangelist is a clergyman. He is paid by the religious denomination he serves. This denomination has large holdings of real estate upon which it pays no taxes. If it paid taxes, it would not have so much money to pay clergymen. Therefore, one of its leading clergymen, acting as spokesman for the rest, defines for us the worst enemy of New York or any city. Thus we get the quality of logic that rules in our churches. It would be laughable were it not pitiable in its weakness. The church isn't dead, and it can still call vile names. How nimbly it yet flings the theologic stinkpot. The fires of the auto da fe are not extinguished. They are only banked in the editorial office of The Christian Work and Evangelist. The worst enemy of New York or any city. It is the old cry of away with him. It is the cry of entrenched tyranny, that he who disagrees with you in religious matters is the enemy of the state. Socrates spoke disrespectfully of the gods, and for this they brewed for him the hemlock. The crime of Jesus was that he undermined the state. Savonarola, Bruno, Lamater, Wycliffe, enemies of society all. The editor of The Christian Work and Evangelist thinks that the state and religion are one. And he is right, For just as long as the state grants immunity from taxation to church property, the divorce is not complete. We haven't yet caught up with Thomas Jefferson. Well, you know what the state in the past has done to those who are considered its enemies. Yes, and that is just what the meek and lowly editor of the Christian Work and Evangelist would do to you if he had the power. Carefully read, analyze, and digest it, we find that the sole excuses churches have for not paying taxes are: first, the churches form a police system which prevents certain people from committing crime. Second, the church supplies us a great number of honest and unselfish citizens who otherwise would be rogues. For these two things, they claim a cash reward from the community. My answer is that both propositions are assumptions quite gratuitous, but that even if they were true, it would not justify the state in remitting their quota of taxes. I have had a large and varied experience with clergymen and church members, and that they are better morally and stand higher intellectually are propositions which they admit, but which no one besides themselves puts forward. The names of clergymen, Sunday school teachers, and pious deacons who go wrong would fill a 5-foot shelf of books. In fact, it is an axiom that the bankers' colony in every penitentiary is made up mostly of church members. When the University of Copenhagen says that church members are better citizens than non-church members, I may believe it. Until then, the verdict must be not proved, and especially so in view of the fact that when Christianity was absolutely supreme, the headsman worked overtime, and crime, grime, blood, poverty, disease, and woe were the rule, not the exception. The doctrine that some folks are so much better than others that they deserve eternal bliss is the most selfish idea ever put forth by mortal man. Folks who think that they are better than others usually aren't. That the idea of endless joy for believers and endless hell for doubters is not being preached now so much as it was a few years ago is nothing to the credit of church members. All separations of society into sacred and secular, good and bad, saved and lost, learned and illiterate, rich and poor, are illusions which mark certain periods in the evolution of society. The offer of endless life and the threat of endless hell are frightful rudimentary errors of the savage mind, born of free and frenzy, and then perpetuated as a police system by the divine collection agency. For not only does a religion of fear keep people good, but it also makes them pay for being kept good. The offer of immunity from the penalties of sin through belief in the blood of Jesus is merely the immunity that human sacrifice once provided, slightly refined and modified. The belief in a blood sacrifice has taken the place of the sacrifice itself. The Orthodox Christian Church still teaches immunity from penalties on the acceptance of its creed. From exemption from the natural penalty of a misdeed to exemption from taxation is but a step. The man who can accept the one takes kindly to the other. Jesus died and paid it all, yes, all the debt I owe. Saved by the blood of the Lamb, that is, thrown it off on someone else. Who cares? Any way to go scot-free. And this evasion of a penalty for wrong committed is called the glad tidings of great joy. To escape the payment of taxes is a variation of the same idea. Many of these saved people do not pay their debts until compelled to. If they work for you, they loaf and visit on company time. They cheat you in 100 ways and often spend as much time trying to evade the responsibility of shouldering the burden as, rightly used, would have carried the message to Garcia. The entire Christian doctrine of rewards and punishments, of a vicarious atonement, and the substitution of a pure and holy man for the culprit is a vicious and misleading philosophy. That fear in some instances has deterred men from crime, there is no doubt. But the era of religion as a police system lies in the fact that it makes superstition perpetual. Untruth that good may follow is not a nice philosophy. It will be noted that the learned editor of the Christian Work and Evangelist pleads as a reason why churches should not pay taxes the assertion that 3/4 of all sermons now preached deal with present-day problems, and the effort is not merely to save souls, but to make better citizens. This is doubtless true. The church is saving herself from disillusion by becoming secularized. Gradually, the world is being educated into the belief that one world at a time is enough. Also, a vast number of men and women see the fact that immunity and exemption are not desirable, that nothing can ever be given away, and that something for nothing is very dear. To make a man exempt is to take from him just so much manhood. And to make a church exempt is to weaken the fabric and place the institution on a mendicant basis. To accept salvation for yourself with the consciousness that there is still one soul in hell would turn your paradise into purgatory if your soul were worth a damn. One man is no man, said Aristotle 400 years before Christ. We are all parts and particles of each other. This matter of exemption from taxation of certain edifices and certain men, transportation at half rates, and 10% discount to clergy and teachers all hinges on a lack of the ethical monotheistic concept. It assumes that certain work is sacred and other work secular, that certain places are holy and others profane. My esteemed colleague, the editor of the Christian Work and Evangelist, admits that this world is no longer, but a desert drear heaven is my home. He admits that we are here and that this is our home now, at least. When he goes a step farther and admits that this is God's world, not the devil's, that every man is doing the best he can with the light and power he possesses, that all human service is sacred, that there is no high or low, that there are no saved so long as men are in bonds to fear, superstition, and incompetence, that a smokestack is as sacred as a steeple, then he will agree with me that churches should pay their just quota of taxes. Good people no longer ask immunity from payment of bills because they are good. Businessmen are just as good as preachers. Business today is founded on the thought of reciprocity and mutuality. We help ourselves only as we help others, and all transactions in life should be cooperative and reciprocal. Granting, for argument's sake, that the church does do all the good claimed by my Christian brother, still that is no reason for its exemption. So far as this court knows, all men who live in houses are good men, making the world of men better by their lives. But this is no reason why their residences should be exempt from taxation. So said a wise and learned judge in deciding the question of taxation of parsonages in Illinois. Here we get the growing concept of the world of thinking men and women, the concept of ethical monism. All is one, and the sacred is that which serves. Pay the price, and provided you pay the price, the thing you buy is worth the money. The churches will never do the good they are capable of doing until they throw off mendicancy. And the beggar is a robber who has lost his nerve, a bandit with a streak of yellow in his ego. The churches must take their stand firmly and frankly as human institutions, asking no exemption, demanding no immunity. Then they will be free. For her own good, the church must meet her responsibilities and not shift her burden of taxes upon the people who do not believe her creed. If you believe in a particular doctrine, that is your affair, and you are the man to pay for its support. To say that I must pay for the support of your creed or else be branded as a foe of society is bad logic, worse ethics, and very indelicate, not to say discourteous. Only that is fair and beautiful which neither threatens, bribes, evades, demands, or supplicates. End of The Taxation of Church Property, page 95 of The Philosophy of Elbert Hubbard, narrated by Rex King.